a week that set some of the worst records ever for the American economy. It all became clear on Friday. We learned that morning that 20.5 million Americans lost their jobs in April, 10 times the record set in 1945 when the country demobilized from World War II. The unemployment rate jumped to 14.7%, the highest since the Great Depression. We've never seen it rise so high so fast. Just 3 months ago, unemployment was at a record low of 3.5%. And as stunning as those numbers are, they don't capture the depth of the damage. Add in workers who've been looking for full-time jobs, the furloughed would hope to get their old jobs back, and more than 1 in 4 Americans is out of work. The lines at food banks are heartbreaking. We can all hope that the economy will bounce back once the virus is contained. Investors seem to be betting on it. By the close of business Friday, the stock market was building on some of its best weeks in decades. So what is Wall Street seeing that Americans aren't yet feeling? How long will the recovery take? What must we do to make sure it happens? And we start with the President's economic advisor, Larry Kudlow. Larry, thank you for joining us this morning. And I do want to get to the economy, but first, this news breaking overnight. We know that 2 White House staffers have now tested positive for COVID, and Drs. Fauci, Redfield, and Hahn are all self-quarantined. Will you and other White House staffers be following their example?
Well, we'll take the advice of the White House medical unit, which is the best in the business. There may be, I don't want to rule anything in or rule anything out. At the moment, there's daily testing, as you may know, for people who come into contact with the president and the vice president. Everybody wants to be safe. We're going to do the best we can. We'll follow the rules and guidelines of the White House medical unit.
You just said you have the best medical unit in the country, the White House medical unit. No doubt that is true. You're getting tests every single day at the White House, anyone who's in contact with the president. Doesn't that really expose the challenge for everyone else in the country right now? If the White House is not fully safe, despite those conditions, how can average Americans feel safe with the idea of going back to work?
Well, look, I don't want to generalize from it because although I don't have all the numbers, I haven't seen that yet. In terms of the White House complex, which is an enormous place, at least 500 people, probably much more than that, George. Those who have tested positive is still a small fraction. Again, I don't know the specific numbers, but we've had relatively very few. And look, I think the key point here, we've established guidelines from our health task force. States are establishing guidelines. I think that businesses, large and small, are probably going to wind up leading this charge as we attempt to reopen the economy and deal with these heartbreaking jobs numbers, these hardship jobs numbers, which are awful. So my point is, why don't we rely heavily on what the businesses, the free enterprise system can produce? Companies are very innovative. They know the job that has to be done. They know on the one hand, folks have to be safe, must be safe. They know on the other hand, we have to have some reopening as much as possible to deal with the economic problem, the pandemic contraction, as I call it. So I think between public and private health systems, we can do this. I guess about half the states are off to a phased-in start. That's a good sign. Safety is absolutely crucial, but it's not either or. I think it's safety and reopening for the economy. I think they go hand in hand.
Let's talk about those devastating job numbers. The president said on Friday that all these jobs will be back. Is that a realistic promise? Is that a promise the president can keep?
Well, look, several things. Number one, as bad as those job numbers were, and I don't want to sugarcoat it because I think the numbers for May are going to be also very difficult numbers. It's going to take a while for the reopening to have an impact. So there's that. The second point is, inside the numbers, there's a glimmer of hope. I don't want to downplay the numbers, mind you, but there's a glimmer of hope. We had about 80% of it was furloughs and temporary layoffs. That, by the way, doesn't assure that you'll go back to a job, but it suggests strongly that the cord between the worker and the business is still intact. I think hopefully that has something to do with the $3 trillion of assistance, including the payroll protection plan. You know, all in on this, we're probably including the Federal Reserve's operations and the budget and fiscal work that President Trump has led with the bipartisan congressional votes. We probably had, George, $9 trillion worth of assistance going to 175 million individuals. It's a remarkable plan to attempt to stabilize a very difficult situation.
It has been an extraordinary response from the government and the Fed. Now House Democrats are saying, led by Speaker Pelosi, that they need about another $2 trillion plan. Aid to state and local governments, much more testing, more direct aid like unemployment insurance, food stamps, direct checks. Yet you and the president have said now is not the time to be dealing with that. Why not?
Well, I'm not saying now is not the time. And I don't think that's what the president said either. I think that many people would like to just pause for a moment and take a look at the economic impact of this massive assistance program, which is the greatest in the United States history. That's all that's being said. Now, I was reading in some papers this morning that there's no talks between, let's say, the White House and the Democrats. That's simply not true. There's no formal negotiations yet. I say yet. But in fact, on Friday, Kevin Hassett, my colleague in the White House, and I did a conference call with about 50 House members, Democrats and Republicans, George, and we are scheduled to have a similar conference call tomorrow on the Senate side. Democrats and Republicans were collecting ideas for next steps, which will undoubtedly be data-driven. I do think there are issues here, and there are probably going to be some agreements and disagreements. Each side has its own positions. So it's not that we're not talking. We are. It's just informal at this stage. And really, after all this assistance, let's have a look at what the impact is in at least the next couple of weeks for the economy.
We've now heard from President Obama, former President Obama, for the first time on his take on how the White House has responded to this crisis. Let's listen.
It has been an absolute chaotic disaster when that mindset of what's in it for me and to heck with everybody else, when that mindset is operationalized in our government.
Your response?
With all due respect to the former president, and I really don't want to get into a political back and forth here, I don't know what he's talking about. I mean, with all the assistance we've done, with all the infrastructure that we, the Trump administration, working with governors and mayors and with Congress, with respect to testing, with respect to all manner of PPE, medical equipment, with respect to ventilators. This President Trump, one thing shouldn't be lost here. He has, and it's unusual in these emergency situations, he's made great use of the private sector. Talking about that earlier in terms of reopening in a safe manner. We have relied very heavily on the smartest people in this country who run retail operations, pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies. You've got automobile companies producing ventilators at a rapid rate. We've ramped up the testing. We have the world's largest testing percentages by far. So I don't understand what President Obama is saying. It just sounds so darn political to me. I just want to say this. Look, what we've done may not be 100% perfect. These things happen once every 100 years. But the overall picture is we've created a massive health and safety infrastructure to deal with the pandemic here in the United States. And judging from the results, where there has been a flattening in the rate of growth of infection rates and mortality rates, it's working. So we're preparing to reopen the economy. And when we do, I think, according to the Congressional Budget Office and a bunch of private surveys, we're going to see a very strong second half of the year. probably 20% economic growth.
Larry.
Policies that were in place on lower taxes and lower regulations are still in place. We may expand on those policies with the Congress. Next year, 2021, could be a tremendous snapback in the U.S. economy. So I'm going to leave President
Larry.
Obama alone. I just want to make the case that I think is the prevailing consensus case right now.
Larry Kudlow, thanks very much for your time this morning.
Appreciate it.